there really all this number of people interested in the topic? So don't feel embarrassed if you're in the wrong space and need to hurry out. We do have microphones, up the back, are you able to hear me? Or not really? Okay. I'm going to sit down then. Is that better? No.
You're going to have to project.
So I will put on my performance voice and project up to the back. My name's Rowan Martirez. I work for a charity and social enterprise called CAN. We're a social investor. We advise a lot of charities and social enterprises on social impact, and we also run office space for third sector organisations in London. Before I introduce our speakers today, I just wanted to get a quick show of hands. Maybe it's my impact head, but I often put people into buckets as I think of them. And I've got 3 buckets, and I'd love you to nominate yourselves for one of them. The first is representing frontline organisations delivering benefit, social impact to the public or others. The second is public commissioners. Perhaps it's with central government, perhaps it's with a local authority or someone else interested in social value. And then the third are other funders and organisations supporting either public authorities or frontline organisations. So I just wanted a sense of, if you could put up your hands, if you work for a frontline organisation, a charity or a social enterprise or other. Great. And the second for commissioners, public bodies or those that work with them. And then the third for others that support those. Okay. So if you didn't see, it was the first and third that had the majority of people and a few of the commissioners. Actually, when it comes to monetisation, I'm a skeptic of it. I do a lot of it myself, and I'm advising organisations that do it as well, but I'm still a skeptic. And I guess part of it is what Tim Hayward said before about that Oscar Wilde quote, knowing the value, the price of everything and the value of nothing, or vice versa. But I actually went back to the full quote from Lady Windermere's Fan, and I'll read it out because I think it's interesting. So Cecil Graham asks, "What is a cynic?" And Lord Darlington says, "A man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing." And Graham responds saying, "And a sentimentalist, my dear Darlington, is a man who sees an absurd value in everything and doesn't know the market price of any single thing." And actually I found this interesting because the challenge here is navigating between sentiment and something like, I don't know, the mercenary or the interest in money only. And actually that's the precise challenge for many social purpose organisations, to navigate between these two poles and find a way to integrate them well together. And those challenges, I think, will come out in our conversation today on monetisation. So despite my scepticism, I've grudgingly accepted that we have to do it, and we have to do it well. And I look forward to hearing from our panellists on what that involves and some of the challenges in doing it, doing monetisation well. So we've got 3 speakers today. We'll hear from Guy, Mark, and Lucy. They're involved in different aspects of supporting organisations to do monetisation well. Guy and Mark in particular have done a lot of work with commissioners and frontline organisations in this space. And Lucy at Nesta, I think, takes a step back and has a broader view of what's happening in that marketplace. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from them today. So without further ado, I guess I'll ask them to speak for 10 minutes each. I'll keep it very to the point. I hope you've got lots of questions, and if you don't, I've got a long list as well that I want to ask. So actually we'll hear from Guy first, and I have my stopwatch ready. If you click on the... yes, fantastic. Thank you.
Excellent. I'll tighten this up as well. So I'm Guy Battle, I'm the Chief Executive of the Social Value Portal. We are a social enterprise and we provide a management tool or a platform for measuring social value for procurement, for management and reporting. And I guess this is kind of the thing that we do, is when the chief exec of a business asks what's the contribution we make to society, you put a number to it, we put a financial value to it. We don't just do that, but that's kind of core to the centre of what we do. A bit of shameless advertising just before I move on to explore that a little bit. We've also set up a group called the Social Value Task Force that combines a whole group of public sector and private sector organisations around the country. We've developed a tool called the Social Value Maturity Index, the SVMI, and it allows organisations, public and private, and there's two kind of tools on there, allows you to measure where you are and also to plot where you want to be. And we've got a series of sort of themes that we ask you to look at around policy, internal management, measurement, market engagement, reporting, etc. And it actually produces an action plan for you. And a lot of local authorities are beginning to use this. I encourage everyone in the room to have a go at it, and you can submit it to us as well. You can get to it via our website, free of charge. Use it internally to sort of get buy-in as the process. But what we're trying to do as a group is establish what good and best practice looks like. But without further ado, diving into why we focus on monetising social value. I guess it's because we're trying to keep it simple. I have to say I'd love to say to you that I have the most amazing algorithm that has come up with the most fantastic way of sort of picking up all these different elements to value, but actually it's really dumb. We're a basic social value for dummies, really, ultimately, and it's one number times another equals the final number, and it's kind of as simple as that. But we are all about delivering locally, so we're all about listening to the local council, and if we can listen to the community, putting a value on the council's needs, and then asking businesses to engage around that very specific palette of needs. So this isn't about coming up with a way of doing loads of different things that you think the council might want. We're quite specific in as much as we're saying, look, this is what the council wants. If you're a business or a social enterprise that wants to work with the council, don't give them what they don't want because it's actually not that valuable to them. Give them what they do want. This is typically what Birmingham are doing, and we call this the TOMS matrix, themes, outcomes and measures. And this ties in with the corporate strategy. So if you went to Birmingham and asked them what their corporate strategy was, they'll have a whole corporate booklet around local employment, communities, good employer, all that sort of stuff. They'll have a series of outcomes and they'll have a series of measures. And measurements are plainly how you assess whether you've got the outcome. So we work on that basis. So you've got a series of themes, outcomes, these are just sort of a selection, so it could be training opportunities in schools, it could be supporting or spend with third sector providers or social enterprise, tons of waste saved from landfill, that type of thing. There might be a series of measures in that, so under jobs it might be the number of young offenders employed or number of voluntary hours committed, and then we'll come up with a series of units and values. And very simply put, the total social value is the sum of the measures times the value. It's as simple as that. So as a business wanting to work with a local authority, you'll go to this sort of network or be on our system, and you basically choose what you're going to do. We don't tell you what you're going to do. So under the Act, there's two key words, proportionality and relevance. So if you're bidding for work, you decide what's proportional according to the size of the job, and you decide what's relevant to you, the contract. Now, there is no reason in my books why a public body procuring for tables and chairs can't actually get an enormous amount of social value, because it could be that a social enterprise is bidding for their work and they happen to employ young offenders as part of it. Now, that is the sort of value that our system will sort of highlight and ensure that that organisation, assuming price point is good, quality is the same, social value will win it. And I'll show you a case study in a moment. So this is kind of akin to social economic analysis, but it's one step further. So, you've got a job, the same job, two different people get that job. On the one hand, you've got middle class person, bank mum and dad, but nonetheless it's an apprenticeship, and that's great. On the other hand, same job going to an individual from a troubled family. So government puts different numbers to that. On the one hand, an apprentice is worth around about £2,500 a year. On the other hand, a young offender getting that same job, the Treasury will say there's a fiscal saving and there's an economic benefit, and that's worth like £34,000 a year. So if you were a business bidding for work and you were employing one apprentice, and that apprentice was a young offender, then the value that you would be able to talk to the local authority about was not just the 2,200, but also that £34,000. And our view is that the local authority should take that into account when awarding the job. We don't think it's right that they don't take into account, and indeed they are bound, in theory, by the Social Value Act, to take that into account. Now, there's lots of ways of valuing sort of these elements, and it is challenging at times. I'm not going to go through all this this sort of sheet, because not least because you can't see it from the back. We try and focus on outcomes. Plainly, that's the best place to focus social value. But sometimes there's no data around outcomes. As a business, we are always going back to the point that is absolutely defendable when it comes to a pound value. And sometimes it doesn't actually allow us to put a true value. So we might actually, in some cases, put a value on the input cost. So voluntary time is a classic one, for instance. A business is offering 100 hours of voluntary time as part of their solution. We'll put an input cost on that, i.e. the equivalent cost of voluntary time in the community, because we don't know what that voluntary time is going to be used for, so we can't value it, so we don't think it should be taken into account. So that's the principle, and so we always follow this as a route, but as I say, focusing on outcome. Now, we could get into impact, but we avoid it at the moment. It's kind of a scary place, impact. And the reason it's scary, takes into account all the well-being issues, and it means you've got to go and speak to people. You know, it's what social return on investment is all about, to get their sense of what value is. Now, we think that's a harder territory to be on, whilst we recognise that at some point we should be embracing it. At the moment, we're not embracing it at the moment, although that is potentially to come, that will help enliven it. So one case study, I'll show you how this has been in action. This is with Harrow Council. Very basic job. They're looking to external wall insulation. You think, what's the social value in an external wall insulation job? They went out to 9 bidders. Those bidders bid through the portal their social value offers against a set of metrics. The weighting was very important. You've got quality 30%, cost 60%. The social value weighting was 10%. And so cost and quality being the same, someone who comes in with a good social value offer is always going to win it. And in fact, we're working with some councils now that are putting the social value weighting at 20%. Above 20%, I think it's debatable, but certainly at that level, it's right. These are the bids coming in. 9 bids, everyone submitted the social value. We've actually, because this is public, everyone can see the different companies there. There's small businesses there. There was no barrier to entry, if you like. What's interesting about that, some of the largest value bids, this is 2 million quid, actually has the smallest social value element. And actually, in fact, this is the winner here, Keepmoat won it, £1 million to do the job, and they're offering £400,000 worth of social value. Now, they're being held to deliver that, so that has now become part of their contract. That £400,000 is made up of voluntary hours, apprentices, school visits, all sorts of things that are numbered against that metric, and that effectively is appended to the contract, and that's it. They're going to deliver it over the next 2 years. There's no sort of iffing and butting. Now, what's beautiful about this, I say it's beautiful, what's useful about this is that the pound allows you to do a direct comparison between those 6 bidders. And so whilst there is a qualitative element, it allows the local authority to actually have a defendable position. So when they're challenged, they'll say, look, this is what it is. All the values were totally open. So everyone knew how we were valuing a young offender. Everyone knew what the value of an apprentice was. Everyone used the same values. These weren't different. They just chose how many they're going to do. So that's my sort of proposal, I guess my justification for rounding pounds. What I will say is that we know that a pound sign would not always reflect the true value of an intervention. I mean, I totally get that and understand it. And actually, sometimes you just don't even want to go there. It's better to have the narrative around it. The trouble is, if you're working with local authorities to try and come up with a number, they can't put, if you're putting stories together, it's always a qualitative analysis. And actually, it's really hard to judge one to the other. So we think pounds is the right way of providing a solution. I think what's very important is to keep it simple. You need to recognise that local authorities are simple beasts. They haven't got time to do loads of complicated analysis. You tell them what you're going to do 5 of them, 10 of them, and then stick to it. And if you can put a value to it that they recognise and it's useful to them and the community needs it, then that's good. So the pound allows comparability. And I think those are the kind of the key issues. And I think the other kind of important thing for me is to recognise that value is delivered in the community. And that for me is kind of key to all of this, closing that loop.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll jump straight on to our next presentations, and then I'll open up for questions and a few from myself as well. So please bear with me.
There we got there. My name is Mark Bolger. I'm the managing director of a company called Social Chapter Calculator. My background is mainly within housing and the public sector. I was a commissioner. Before I started on my own venture, I was a commissioner in the public sector around third sector infrastructure and health and wellbeing. About 3 years ago, I started looking at a way of monetising social value because it was more up and coming in terms of people wanting to know what the actual value of it is, of what it is that they're delivering and what they're creating for that. So what we've been trying to do, and I've been locked in a room for about 2 years trying to sort this software platform out, is to develop a solution that will cut across the public, private and the third sector. And what we're trying to do is design a system that has a database of outcomes and values that people can select from. I'm not going to go through the presentation, but I will flick through it. Basically, within the platform, we've looked at all of the different tools that are available and that are out there for different people to use, and we've built them into one single platform which can be used across all different organisations. The frameworks that we actually use at the moment are cost-benefit analysis, and when we say cost-benefit analysis, that's around the fiscal and the economic savings that you actually create to the government and taxpayers. So if somebody gets a job, there's a reduction in benefit payments. And then we've got social return on investment. It's a system that allows you to do a full social return on investment calculation. So where outcomes last over a number of periods, it will do the calculation for you. And that is mainly focusing around the well-being of individuals. So if you get somebody a job, you improve their well-being, so the confidence, the self-esteem, their aspirations improve. And the system holds a database of 4,500 outcomes and values. And those outcomes and values, it's not something I've been sat there writing. They've actually come from what's called the Global Value Exchange, which is Social Value UK's main database around outcomes and values. So we've developed a system where our software talks to their platform and we get the data in from them so that people can actually do the calculations. So it's quite sophisticated in terms of the back end around the code and all of the analytics that it does, but the calculations are being verified by Social Value UK. The cost-benefit database is around the new economy, cost-benefit unit cost database. So what they've done is they've looked at all of the different costs and savings that can be created that impact on public services and also around the wider economy. And we fed that into the database, into the software. So the way that the software works is you can carry out a cost-benefit analysis and a social return on investment. And also we've got an additional platform, which is what we call local economic benefit analysis, which is basically an LM3 calculation to look at how you're actually supporting local economic growth. And also within the system, what we've developed is we've got spending practices for staff and suppliers, because one of the biggest problems that people have is around gathering the data to do the analysis. Now you can get unit values, the value of an outcome or people's spending, but there's also impact measures that need to be included, because what we've found with a lot of tools is that they're claiming a lot of the value, and it's not realistic. So where people are getting a ratio of 1 to 50 on litter picking programs or very small scale events and things like that, they're not realistic, and people are not going to believe it, particularly around the public sector. So you have to have an approach to actually calculating value. What we've not done, we've not created a new approach. These are existing economic tools that are out there to calculate and monetize social value. We've just put it under a platform and made it very simple for people to use. It is that simple. It's a case of selecting outcomes. We've got standardized impact measures that are being researched around your dead weight and your displacement. There's also your discount rates that you can set, and also your drop-off calculation. So once you put some basic data in, you can actually do a calculation very, very quickly at the touch of a button. One of the things we're looking to include is around sentiment analysis as well. So that's how happy people are, you know, the relationships and how they value certain things and different organisations, and also some stuff around social price metrics and ratios. So it is really, it's a system that makes it very simple for people to do calculations. We're taking all of the mathematics and the economics out of the actual, out of people's heads and into the software, so they don't have to think about it. There are metrics that are in there, formulas and everything that's in the back end to do the calculations for you. But what we've actually found is, when we were developing this, the biggest challenges that we actually faced was creating a simple platform, something that's simple and easy for people to use. We take the maths out and the economics out so that people can understand it, so you don't have to be a genius. One of the key drivers as well is that bringing consultants in to actually do this type of analysis for you is very costly, okay? And that's a big challenge. Resources are very tight. Spending is very tight within the public sector. So having to spend a lot of money around consultants is a big problem, and you've got to show value for money. So we created a platform that will allow you to actually do this without the cost of bringing in consultants in, which takes part of one of my jobs away. But the reality is, you know, it's about people calculating social value and measuring impact and doing it in the right way. It needs to be safe as well. So one of the things is around benchmarking, and that's our biggest challenge. What we want to do for different sectors is develop a universal approach. So that is based on outcomes frameworks. So what you have is a set of outcomes and values and standardised impact measures, spending proxies that a different sector would use. So we're actually working with the construction sector at the moment about developing that outcomes framework. That then becomes a bespoke framework that sits in the platform. So you will easily be able to do a calculation on things like employment and skills. We've employed so many apprentices. You put that data in of how many apprentices we've got. You put the outcomes that are attached to that, which is in a database, and it will give you a calculation. The only thing that you would need to do within the software is look at how much you actually contributed to delivering that outcome, because that avoids you from overclaiming, along with the other dead weight, displacement, drop-off and discounting. But that's the question that is really faced by organisations, and this comes back to impact measurement as well. A lot of confusion around what it is they're measuring and why they're measuring it, and does it relate to the outcomes that you're actually delivering, so that you can therefore value it. So the software itself simplifies the process, so you can actually do estimates around, before you actually start a piece of work, you can estimate the value of actually what it's going to deliver. And also, it's about consistency. So one of the big things about having a platform for different sectors, so we'll focus on health and well-being. We're working with CCGs at the moment around their outcomes and values and what's being delivered locally in neighbourhoods. So it's having a consistent approach across different sectors so that they can benchmark against one another, and so you can understand why one's performing better than the other in terms of the outcomes that are being delivered and the impact they're actually having. that is probably the biggest challenge that we have. So we've been working across all of the sectors. I mean, I've come from some third sector background as well around delivery. So I've done community parks and gardens and things like that, and working with community groups for quite a long time. And there's a lot of confusion about social value as well. And I think over the next few years, we're going to be getting a better understanding, and there's going to be better systems to actually do the monetisation and also the impact measurement. So one of the things that we're looking at now is to reduce the resources around impact measurement. How can we measure the impact against an outcome at the end, rather than doing the measurement, so looking at distance travelled of people that you're working with, things like outcome star, you have to do, or surveys, you have to do measure at the start and where they finish. What we've done is developed a new scale that will incorporate the measurement of an outcome at the end, and it will incorporate that distance travelled. So that's one of the things that we've been working. I think the big thing is around digitalisation. People need software platforms to do impact measurement and also calculation, and that is what our mission has been around delivering. So.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you to SE UK for inviting me to be here today. Can't hear you. Okay, yes, I'll do my theatre voice. So my name is Lucy Heddy. I work for Nesta in our impact investments team, and my job is to look at the social impact that our portfolio is achieving alongside the financial returns. So I wanted to start by asking the audience, another audience poll, who here has ever seen a financial value put on a social outcome that they didn't really believe? Right, pretty common problem. There's a lot of underlying skepticism around social monetisation of social values, and I'm going to talk a bit today about why I think that is, where that comes from, and how we might start to think about some standards that could help to counter some of the skepticism and really make more value out of valuing social value. So, I think, often when I think about a financial value for a social outcome, it looks like a sausage. It looks quite tasty, but we know there are lots of different ingredients that go into calculating that number, different levels of rigor, what sort of unit costs are you using, what are your discount rates, assumptions, marginal costs, a whole variety of things. We don't know how they're being used, where they're being used, in what quantities, and we know that if we knew, we'd probably find that a little bit less attractive. Now, it's no surprise, actually, that we end up like this when you think about all the different reasons that we have for measuring social value, and I'm going to go through a few examples here. First one is around advocacy. It's very common to want to put a financial value on a social outcome because you want to raise awareness of how important it is. This is a great example. Cost of mental health problems in England, £105.2 billion. Now, the accuracy of that number probably isn't very important. Is it 105.2 billion? Is it 116.7 billion? Is it 92.3 billion? Doesn't really matter. That's still a really big number designed to make people sit up and think, gosh, this is a problem that we should care about. Another common reason for putting a financial value on a social outcome, designing contracts. This is an example from Nesta's own portfolio. We're invested in the Reconnection Social Impact Bond, which is all about helping older people reduce loneliness in older people. And we all know that there are various values to be placed on that, and we've ended up in a contract as investors where we will get paid out about £600 per reduction in loneliness for each person on this particular scale of loneliness that we're using, and the local authority decided that for them that's worth it. Now here you can see that accuracy is becoming a bit more important. This is a financial deal that we've worked on, but at the end of the day, the most important thing for the local authority is that they know they're paying out less than what that outcome is worth. That it's worth them paying the money, they're going to get back more in value than they're paying out in cash terms to us. So they need to be accurate enough to be sure of that, but does it matter to them that the real value is £1,000, £2,000? It's still a good deal to them if they're only paying us £600. Third reason, and I think this is where accuracy becomes really, really important, is around prioritisation. So this is an example from the Copenhagen Consensus, which is a big international non-profit that has committees and committees of economists and development experts, and they come together and try to work out what are the most cost-effective ways of investing in development. And so they're saying that, you know, here's where you get the most bang for your buck. Reducing malnutrition, benefit 15 times higher than cost. Gender equity, 5 to 15 times higher than cost. And your least effective down there, prevention of drug abuse, wage protection. These sorts of prioritisations are extremely influential on the global scale. They redirect billions of dollars of money. But you can see that that prioritisation is obviously very, very sensitive to who's decided how that outcome is measured, what goes into that value calculation. And a lot of what goes into this value calculation is the narrow measure of quality adjusted life years. It's a very medical based model. So a lot of people would dispute this prioritisation based on what goes in. And I'm just thinking about Guy's example earlier, where you had all those people submitting contracts who had different levels of social value as well as different levels of cost. Well, what if those bars are different heights, not because they represent different underlying value, but because they're different levels of accuracy and they've been calculated in different ways? That's actually a real problem for effective asset allocation. We might not be funding the most important things. So you've got these conflicting forces. On the one hand, everyone needs their own approach that's appropriate for them, appropriate for their purpose. But in the other, but going against that is this crisis of confidence. People just aren't believing a lot of the numbers that go in front of them. So Nesta has some experience related to this. We have our standards of evidence, and these are standards that are supposed to help you assess how confident you should be about whether an intervention is having a positive social impact or not. It's really about quality of evaluation. And we've had those standards for 4 years now, and we've learned a lot over those 4 years, and the science has changed quite a lot. But I think, and so we're looking to refresh those standards. And when we've been thinking about the lessons that have come from 4 years of implementation of those standards, I think there's a couple that are very relevant to this world. The first is, we get a lot of people who say that the same intervention has been given different scores according to the standards by different institutions. That's really problematic for us. If people see conflicting scores, then the standards aren't going any way to solving a crisis of confidence. If anything, they're perpetuating a crisis of confidence. And the second is that a lot of organisations get very frustrated by them because they're often used in a way for which they weren't intended. People say, oh, this funder is telling me I have to move up the standards of evidence, everyone's supposed to go up. That's not what the standards say at all, but they've been very much misapplied. On the positive side, a lot of people say they love the simplicity of the standards of evidence. So we're trying to think, how do we maintain the simplicity of a standard whilst counteracting some of these problems that you get when you just put a standard out there into the world and see what happens. And I just want to talk through one solution that we're thinking about, and I'd be interested in audience reaction and whether it's something that would be applicable here. And that's, instead of having standards of practice, that you have standards of reporting. This is something that comes from the world of medical publishing. If you want to publish a medical study, do what you want in the study, but you have to report on various things so that anyone reading that study can judge for themselves whether or not it's fit for their purpose. So you have to say how many people were in the study, what were the eligibility criteria, what was the drop-off, and so on. And I think it would not be beyond the capacity of the people working in this area to say, okay, what are the things that we need to be transparent about, whether it's around discount rates, are you doing marginal cost or unit cost, so on and so on, that in a standard format that people can easily learn to digest that information, and that by bringing transparency, it reduces some of the scepticism and builds confidence. So, love to hear what you think about that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lucy, and all three of you. I'm just going to ask for questions. If you have a question, can you raise your hand? I believe we have a. Do we have a microphone in the room? No. So if you could stand up, say your name, the organisation you're representing. I'll take three, and then we'll put them to the panel, and then maybe I'll ask them myself. So. Tom, if you could stand up, just so everyone else can hear your question.
Yeah, certainly. Tom Wild, Craft Housing Trust. I joined 14 months ago. I've been doing a lot of work looking at how we report our social value, how we secure social value through procurement. And I think I want to challenge your first point, actually, which I was under the impression that we needed to monetise social value because our leadership and our leadership team needed us to do that. I've now challenged them on it, and we don't. And they would happily just let us report on what are the outcomes that we're delivering through social value and what outcomes are we securing through procurement. So you said you have grudgingly accepted that we have to do it and do it well. Do we have to do it?
Great. Okay. Take another one? Yes, at the end there.
I'm Philip Resident, I commissioned for a local authority. I wonder if we're getting really obsessed with outcomes, and we've actually jumped a step, which is we don't really know the outputs. So there's many interventions that are used with people that have no evidence base behind them. They don't just, they're not just missing multiple RCTs. They have no RCTs. They have no pre and post evaluation. And across the country, we spend billions and billions and billions, and then we're all saying, oh, we're going to measure our own outcomes on this. Well, there's something about an intervention that's got an RCT and about the fidelity of implementation of that intervention that I think is a step before the outcome stage. And we don't need to then bother with outcomes, potentially, because what we say is, this has already been tested. It's been tested across Europe. It's been tested across the States. Let's put in things that work. But we're always innovating, and then we're saying, well, then we'll measure the outcome. And I think there are lots of examples of large amounts of money where actually we just can't see the benefit. Troubled families is one that comes to mind.
Great. And there was one, yes, in the middle there.
Coleman Efficiency North. We're a social housing procurement consortium in the Yorkshire region. I think my questions are more around sort of the technical side of it. Obviously, there's a wide variety of different products or providers out there that do the social value calculation. We underwent our first social impact reporting system at the end of last year using the HACS model. We commissioned a consultant to come in and do that for us because, to be honest, we was like flapping in the wind. We weren't entirely sure which way to go. So I think from my point of view, it's just understanding how easy is it to switch from one measurement to another. I understand what your point about trying to standardise the whole methodology behind it. And equally, I find it really quite useful. Because obviously, a lot of people in this room that are on this social value journey. I think from our own point of view, we're quite far down that journey. Hence the reason we'll do a mandate for reward today. You wouldn't know, but we are. But I just think it's interesting that there's obviously clear impetus to try and drive social value through lots of different sectors. But my question is mainly about how easy it is to switch values.
Yeah.
Thank you. So just those three, if others didn't hear up the back, the first was around, do we really need to monetize? Didn't like my statement at the start, that grudgingly accepted a need to do it, or perhaps just didn't like Oscar Wilde. The second is the balance of where we focus attention on evidence. Is it at the outputs level, outcomes, value, perhaps earlier on as well? Have we got that right? And the mention of family nurse partnership, a lot of money put into a large-scale program, and the evaluations came back relatively recently of it's not effective in producing the intended outcomes. Other outcomes, yes, but not the intended outcomes. So there's an issue with the understanding the outputs here. And then finally, when you're on your journey, can you change tack? Are you locked in some sense when you're going through a monetization journey? So 3 there. I was also saying that to allow the 3 to gather their thoughts. And just like to ask, who would like to tackle, let's say, I'd like to go for the first one, on do we really need to monetize? So maybe a way to ask this is, well, what are the drivers for monetizing?
But why are you here, Tom? Why are you here in this session? To let, anyway, it doesn't matter.
I'm still battling with myself.
I jest.
So what
the answer
are
is,
the needs? Why
so
are
I don't
we
think you have to
monetizing?
monetize. I don't think you have to monetize at all. I mean, I think it's very important. This answers also this question about number 2 as well that Philip mentioned. I think you've got to measure, and you've got to measure some things, and it could be outcomes, it could be outputs, it could be inputs, but it needs to be consistent. And again, the methodology, I don't think it necessarily matters if you change methodologies, as long as you are consistent in how you're measuring. And if you put a value, so the hacked valuation is different to our valuations, because we generally base ours on the Green Book, the same new economy ones that Mark mentioned. But ultimately, it's the data input point that's important. You know, the number of young offenders or the number of school visits, or whatever. That's the important point. And I think, so answering Tom's question, I think no, you don't have to monetize it. It's just a useful metric, so that when I know that talking to local authorities and you're trying to compare, how do I compare? You know, someone's offered me 2 apprentices, and on the other hand, I've been offered 1 young offender being engaged. How do I compare those 2? I've got no idea which is better. And that's where I think monetisation is useful.
Anything to add, Mark? Or
Yeah, I'll just say, you know, the first thing you said was around your board, Tom, and your board are not so concerned with that. It all depends on who the audience is. Big example. Phone call last Friday, Lancashire Council are cutting the floating support. They need the social profit calculation to show the value around the fiscal, economic and the social well-being that's being created from it. They need it by next week. You know, they've got all of their data, but it's been brought in to do that, because that develops the business case for them to retain that service. It's outsourced to Calico, which is a housing provider, which are investors in the social profit calculator. But what I'm saying is, it all depends who it is that wants that information. So although it's not necessarily important to your board, your public sector organisation, your commissioners, it will become more and more important for. So being able to understand how you monetise it, developing simple approaches to actually do that, or using tools that can enable you to do that. You know, you need to start. A lot of organisations are already on that journey, but you need to start at some point. It will come around that.
Lucy, do you want to add to any of that, or the other two questions on the evidence outputs, or this when you're on a journey? Because I know your investment fund has been on a journey, and have you found it easy to change tack once you've started? There's a few
no, I
things
haven't
for
had
there.
time to think
Sure,
through that question.
sorry.
But I will. So the only thing I would add, I absolutely agree with both of you. It's about why are you doing it? Never do any of this stuff. Never do a logic model or measure anything or do an RCT or monetize your outcomes unless you know why you're doing it and for what purpose. All of these things are just tools. This is a spanner. If you don't have a screw loose, don't use the spanner. Maybe you need something else. So I think no one should feel like these are things that are just being done to them, and no one should tell you what tool to use because you're the only person who knows what problem you have.
There was this question of prioritisation. You raised it explicitly, that a potential role for monetisation might be to prioritise. I guess when we've got priorities, they're often described as political judgments. That if you're looking to do A or B, or should we put money into area A or area B, and every commissioner has this challenge as well.
Yeah.
I guess where monetisation comes into this, is my question, is monetisation doing politics by other means? Is it making judgments about priorities that should stay in politics and should stay away from the money, or is it okay? And some of those questions, I know from my experience, are raised alongside this. Any comments or questions on that? And then I'll come back to the audience, as I've got a few people eagerly wanting to input.
I just want to come back on the point around the HAT model, because I didn't get a chance to answer it. You know, you said about switching models. You're not actually really switching models. The HAT model is it's a very narrow focused, based on community investment, and they're developing other outcomes and values. But it's basically 53 outcomes and values in the social value bank, variations based on geographical and demographics. So that's what they've actually created. They've used a well-being valuation technique. That's what they've actually done. So there's a number of different valuation techniques that can be used. The model that you're actually using, what they're doing is they're doing like a social value snapshot of a year's time. You can do social value snapshots. What they're not including is all of the impact measures. So you'll find with HAT, you're getting very high ratios, and it's very questionable. And the problem that they've got is that they only include dead weight. There's no attribution displacement. There's no drop off, and but what that actually did, it actually started getting people thinking around monetisation and calculation, which is great. But it's actually doing it properly. It's including all of the impact measures. So you're not actually swapping your model, because they are outcomes and values with some impact measure, but not all of it. What you'd be doing is you'll be either changing it into a snapshot with all of the impact measures, social return investment. You can break it down by your fiscal and economic savings that you create to government. So all I'm saying is in our platform, it includes all of the values that are in the Global Value Exchange. So your baseline wellbeing valuations that were done by Daniel Fujiwara some time ago, they're all in there. And all of the impact measures, so you get a more accurate calculation. You're not changing models, as it were.
Can I just say that that's one view? I have to say I've got some respect for, not just some, I have respect for the work of Daniel Fujiwara, and done well, for its purpose, it works well. So I just want to give a caveat there.
So
Anything
I'll just pick
more
up
in
on the
response to
politics.
me
No,
or
just
something there?
on the politics
Yeah.
thing. There is plainly you could take the view that there is a political political veil that sort of informs some of the values. But I think what's certainly in our experience, at least, when we're talking values, the ones that the local authorities that are picking up on are the things that are going to either save them money or put real value that is kind of measurable and it kind of needs to appear on someone's balance sheet. And unfortunately, local authorities, for better or for worse, they don't actually care necessarily if it appears on the individual's balance sheet. So that's why the well-being thing they tend not to get involved in, because it's my balance sheet, I'm in the community. But where it's saving them money, because you have to remember that our local authorities are being hit by a 40% cut and just a massive revenue cut, they have to make these decisions. So I don't think you could argue it's politics, but actually I also argue it's just plain reality. They need to work out how to make savings, and I think this is all about letting business, a signpost to business, saying this is what's important to us, help us, and this is, that's the process.
So the gentleman up the very back, yes? And then Nigel after. Yes.
Richard Harrison, 6 Class Equal. It strikes us that each of the speakers had a very valid point. So I think this is around evidence-based decision making. Ultimately, politicians will always make the decision. This is around giving them the evidence to play out. And I think to see this as a process, I can see it was almost in reverse order in terms of the topic. Because if you want to put the valuation criteria on social value and procurement, that's going to be priced and costed. It's going to be a cost to the process. The local authority or the commissioner needs a business case to do that. So it's about the efficacy of interventions of what they're buying and the cost benefit analysis around that. So I think this is all very important stuff. There's a rule for all of it, isn't there? I think the question is this is complex stuff, and what can the government do to educate the public sector on what to do?
Great. Nigel?
Nigel Gershon, Chairman of Big Issue. We now manage or advise about £150 million of social funds, mainly in social enterprise, but some of the big funds, like the public funds. And we've got looking at a new approach. There's something called the Social Imperative Index, and it is really interesting. What it does is says what you shouldn't be mixing is social outcomes with economic data. Because if you do that, so what it has is an index that looks at everything around the Sustainable Development Goals, and it really is just about things like health, activity, education, human rights, and all the rest of it. Because if you start mixing this data, what you don't know is what investment decisions you make create what the effect is on the social outcomes if you don't split it up. And so, and I'll just give you a really simple example, because I think part of this for us is, and I agree with Nessie, what are we doing here? We're here to dismantle poverty. Right? And we're here to dismantle poverty, and it's an intergenerational dismantling of poverty. It's not on short-term life cycles. It's often dominated by government, local authorities, and so on. Not because they're not good people, because that's the way they work. And so I absolutely agree with that. So, for example, we did a study in Renfrewshire, and in Renfrewshire there's a whole load of estates outside Paisley, really isolated. There's one, I won't name them, one private company owns a bus company and owns the taxi company. They don't run buses at night into the centre because they make more money on the taxis, which means people don't go into further education, night classes, they don't go to things, they don't go to health, they don't use the high street and all the rest of it. So for us, what our decision we would take in our investment is, if we invested in a company that ran buses from those estates into the centre of town at night, what is that effect on the social outcomes? Don't mix up the two to try and find what I think is sometimes, and we do it ourselves, sometimes a really illogical, stupid value that I agree with you, because it takes away from what our mission is, and that is dismantling poverty.
Thank you. And in the middle here. Yep.
Joe Edwards, social entrepreneur and MD of Good Connection. But I'm ex-Experian, and my background is in big data in the private sector. And it's a question really to Lucy, and it's a question, but also I'm thinking hopefully maybe even a positive idea and thought. The question is, within the big data sector, Experian, Action, these sorts of companies, there's literally decades of knowledge capital and systems and asset building around very, very complex, deep data. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're not much more than driving advertising. but there's tremendous amount of knowledge and experience there. As an example, some individuals experience and hold over 300 variables around that particular individual, which goes into an algorithm to help us understand what they're doing, where they're going to be, and all the rest of it. Is there an opportunity, I'm wondering, to engage with that industry and ask for their help and expertise in applying some of their skill sets to this measurement? Because they have to do it very accurately, because it's driving a commercial business. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to engage them and say, give us a hand, help us get this right. So,
Thank you. So what can government do to educate, particularly that was addressed, I think, to local authority commissioners around these issues? The comment on mixing the economic and the social, and then this final point on who can we access to bring skills of big data to bear. There was one explicitly addressed to Lucy. Do you want to go first on that?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with that one because that's quite straight. Sorry, should I stand up? Would that be a bit easier? So, on the big data question, I would love to talk to you more about that. That's one thing we've explicitly identified when we're thinking about revising our standards now, is it's not just that we've got feedback and lessons, the science has changed. From 4 years ago, we were just starting to get excited about RCTs and that we could implement them in the field. We now know a lot about how appropriate they are and what context they work in. And in the meantime, all the big data...
Can you just say what an RCT is?
Oh, sorry.
I don't know. I don't know if
Okay.
everyone else knows. Sorry.
A randomised controlled trial.
Oh, okay.
Which, so that was very cutting edge 4 years ago. There's a lot more that's been done since, and we would love to tap into some of that, so it'd be good to talk afterwards. I think this thing about maybe talk a bit about mixing the financial and the economic variables. I sound like a broken record, but again, it's this going back to the purpose piece. It's a direct trade-off. You lose transparency by putting a financial value on something. What you lose is the ability for someone to come and look at an outcome and put their own value on it and put their own priorities on it. But what you gain is some simplicity and an easy way to weigh up one thing against another. So you just have to think very carefully about that trade-off and what's right for your context. And to the gentleman who asked a question in the first round, who I just wanted to say, no, we don't know enough even about what outputs we're achieving. You're absolutely right. We're, in a sense, I think it's very valuable to be doing this stuff that almost comes at the end of the measurement chain, because it shows people what you can do once you have that data, and it's important for us to be innovating and developing, but we mustn't forget that most of the time we just have no idea whether what we do works. And it's not just about randomised controlled trials. There are lots of other rigorous methods that tell you about what would have happened in the absence of your intervention, but we need to stay committed to that agenda as well.
Any comments from the two of you? Mark, so what government can do to educate, or on the mixing point?
In terms of the education, the drivers have to be from government, and they are there. There's the Public Services Social Value Act, and it's telling local commissioners that they have to, consider social value when they're purchasing services and products and things like that. So the drivers are there. I think there needs to be a bit more guidance around what that means locally to commissioners, because commissioners, you're seeing it in tender documents around incorporating social value. Organisations are now saying we'll guarantee this in terms of social value. So it's about guidance around the contract, around delivery, and also how you will actually monitor and measure the social value that's being created, because it develops the business case to continue with that activity and create more social value. The way that we do it, we split it out in terms of the fiscal saving, so what the savings are to the government taxpayer, what the impact is on the wider economy around tax, HMRC, things like that, people's increased spending, and then also around the well-being. So you've got a full, we also include local economic benefit analysis, but you've got a full picture. So whoever it is that's looking at it can pick the bit out which is most interesting to them. I do think there needs to be a lot more guidance coming from central government, particularly to the local authorities, so that they can actually implement it. And that's really, what I would think on that.
Yeah, so I'll just pick up on, big data I think that's a really interesting area and needs to be, there's such a massive opportunity around just linking Philip's sort of comments earlier with the big data man, in terms of outputs, outcomes, and understanding the interventions that should be made and trying to understand sort of and measuring the difference it makes. So I think we're just beginning to, in fact we've only just understood that there's an opportunity there, let alone explore it. I think the education is really important, and this is kind of for us I guess the massive success but also the downfall of the Social Value Act, which, as was mentioned in the opening plenary, is a very innovative piece of legislation, in as much that it kind of says you will or you could do this, and it's like one page. It's the shortest piece of legislation you've ever seen. So that, in a way,
I think Brexit legislation was
yeah, that's right, Brexit
short,
legislation.
but,
Yes. But so the opportunity though around the interpretation of the Social Value Act is where local authorities are really struggling, and those applying it, and those who want to sort of use the Act to sort of show how they are contributing to society, not least because the Act really just applies to services, doesn't even apply to, just services alone, below the EU threshold, or above the EU threshold, so it covers nothing. But within that, thereby, is the opportunity, because I think the Social Value Act says you can do anything you want, you can apply it anywhere you want. Most local authorities, or a lot of local authorities, are still exploring that. So I think education is essential to ensuring that local authorities and also social enterprise, charities, third sector understand that opportunity.
I'll chip in with my own opinion on that. I think education, frankly, can be limited if it's about lecturing and hectoring. When education works is where it starts with understanding someone's position. So it's my personal opinion is from my work, I have to make sure that I truly try to understand the position that very stretched local authority commissioners are in. And it was, as one anecdote, it was a real eye-opener for me that one particular commissioner in East London, where we have our social investment funds, could not consider cashable savings more than 2 years hence. That was too late. If we could do some work that had cashable savings in 2 years' time, they were not interested because they had higher priority issues. So just simple understanding to start with, and then the education piece might come in. I'll get off my bully pulpit and ask for more questions. We've got time for one more round if there are questions. The lady in the middle with the scarf. Yes.
Hi, my name's Alice Thornton. I'm from Reducing, which is a social enterprise working in East London. I guess my scepticism around monetising social value is linked to whether it kind of provides a sort of slightly false promise of being able to take away some of the more irrational or bias in people's decision making, particularly where you might have a situation where different, you think about the graph that one of the speakers showed us where there were different organisations bidding for work and they all had different levels of social value that they promised as part of the contract. I guess my scepticism is it's quite plausible that you have a situation where all of the different bidders were promising the same amount of social value, but were promising to achieve it in different ways. So they might all say we can achieve £400,000 worth of social value. I'm going to do it by investing in training and skills in my workers. I'm going to do it by creating apprenticeships for ex-offenders. I'm going to do it by volunteering in local schools, etc. And at that stage, you still need to introduce an element of decision making that might be more values-based on the part of the commissioner. And so hence the kind of the purpose of monetisation in that instance kind of falls apart. I'm just interested in the comments that kind of that.
Jeremy?
Yeah, Jeremy Robinson, I'm Chief Executive of Clarity. We're a social enterprise that produces cleaning products and toiletries, but the majority of our workforce are people with disabilities. It's a really follow-up to the education question, really. It's just that social enterprises tend to act holistically around the mission of the organisation, and not in the sort of silo approach that local authorities and governments that government do. It's how we can really embed our holistic approach across government.
Right. And the lady here. Yep.
Hi, Rita. Come from Brighton, from a little company called Big Lemon. My question is very practical and kind of infant. Say there's a team of about 16 people, and most of them are drivers, and they drive buses on renewable energy and trying to save the world that way. But when it comes to monetizing and numbers, there isn't the right kind of skill set of people. So my question is, where do you start? And I was hearing Mark talking about this tool, and earlier somebody said another tool. So kind of where do babies start with even choosing or knowing, kind of the very basics?
Great, thank you. So first a comment about the biases and values. Where does that fit in here? Is it displaced out or not? The focus versus holism. Particularly for a social enterprise dealing with silos, or at least people with specific responsibilities who are funders, and where to start on the journey. Some tips. What I believe social. Speaking on the last question, Social Enterprise UK have a range of guides around this. And what I'll do is I'll ask them to make sure there's a list there available for anyone that gets in touch with them that gives some of the main sources of information in the sector. So I'll save an answer from the panel on that for time saving, really. So stay tuned via SE UK. So to the first 2 points.
Should I dive into because that was our graph showing the different bidders. So it's a good question, and in fact we've just faced it just now, because I have to say we're still exploring this. We don't have it right yet. I can tell you that we are still trying to work out, how best to measure, especially during social value during the tender process. We're getting closer, but it's kind of we're slowly working around to the target. What we did on that job in Harrow, in particular, was that the social value score, which you remember was 10% weighted, 7% of that, or 7% of that 10, was down to the score itself, the quantitative, and then 3% was down to the how, the method statement that sat behind their particular pledges. And we've just faced it. We're just doing some work at the moment for Legal and General. And Legal and General are not bound by the Act, but they've decided to embed social value into their procurement for procuring 1,000 new homes down in a place called Crowthorne, which is south, it's near Bracknell anyway. And there we've got 3 bidders. And interestingly, none of those bidders have, well, one of the bidders knows about the public sector. There was 2 other bidders that don't particularly know about social value. And so they've promised the earth. I mean, the numbers that are coming back are just like really crazy numbers. And so it's all in the method statement. So I think the 2 together are very important within that. We've had to go back for clarification. But this is part of the education as well. I think as we're talking about educating local authorities, I think it's as important to help those bidding for work with the local authorities to understand what these issues are and build their capacity and their knowledge within it, to ensure that we're getting the right things being delivered in the right way.
So the 2 points on perhaps the biases and values, or the focus and holism.
Can I just come on that point with regards to the variation? From the graph it was showing that people had different responses, and I think this goes back to more guidance from local authority in terms of local authorities having an outcomes framework. In 2007, local area agreements were introduced, and within the local area agreements they had what's called outcomes frameworks. The only thing that was missing from that was the valuation of the outcomes. So it's like a similar approach. So if the local authority are giving out a tender document, they need to say, these are the outcomes that we want you to measure, this is the value of these outcomes, you need to have a level of impact, tell us what your impact's going to be and what that value would be. So it's a more consistent approach. And that's really where government needs to drive it down and give them guidance, and local authorities need to then push that through their contracts, the tender documents, because you will get variations, because there's a lot of confusion around social value, impact measurement, monetisation, and developing an approach to it for different sectors is the way forward with it.
And I'd just add, I agree. I think that just putting one number on value does create a false sense of security. How could it not? We're all human. Something's just collapsed into one number. I think one of the reasons for the whole financial crisis was that we looked at credit ratings and decided that that was enough to invest trillions of dollars. We were wrong. It doesn't mean that those ratings weren't useful and didn't have insight. And I think there is more to be done about how do you sensibly use these numbers when they're presented to you. What are the questions you should ask? How should they be appropriate? And I think some case studies or experiences around use cases, not just how do you do it, how do you get to the number, but how should you use that number in your decision-making processes, and how might you bring values in alongside that, I think would be a big part of the education agenda and should be.
We've just got a couple of minutes left. I want to end with giving a minute for each of you of your thoughts, perhaps on major opportunities or where next in this space. We had one question around big data and the skills that are available to bring to bear on this. But there might be other things that you think might be opportunities or where next in the space of monetisation. I'd like to take a stab at it.
Well, I'd just like to say about the thing, different organisations are on different journeys around social value. So you've all got different experiences. Some of them are more advanced than others. Some of them are at the very beginning. So one of the things that the lady said about where do we start, you need to understand the impact that you're trying to create and who it is that you're trying to, who you're actually trying to show who that impact is for. And is it really important that you monetize the social value? Will the impact of your organisation be sufficient? Is it somewhere where you want to go? But starting level, you need to be understanding your impact. So whether it's carbon emissions, whether it's noise pollution, air pollution, things like that, mapping that out, also looking at the workforce in terms of the drivers, you upskilling them. So there's a whole range of things, but you need to understand that bigger picture of what you're actually delivering. If you want to move, so once you've got your impact and you want to move to monetisation, there are tools out there that will help you do that. There are, expensive consultants that you can buy in if you've got the resources. But what you're best off doing is looking for the tried and tested approaches. Cost benefit, I'll advocate them, social return on investment, local economic benefit analysis. They're not mine. I've just created a software platform to enable people to use them. So that's what I would do, go for tried and tested models.
Just in terms of just resources, so I just plugged the Social Value Task Force again, which is a kind of, it's lots of local authorities from around the country who've put case studies together. You'll find, if you type into Google Social Value Task Force, you'll get the Social Value Maturity Index plus access to 2 documents that have a lot of case studies. Again, the Harrow one in there. The one area that I think there's a massive opportunity is if we can get planning, if we can get social value into the planning process and the development process. And I think that, for me, is, if you think about applying it to local authority buying, it's one level, but actually developers are putting 3-4 times as much money into the local economy than the public sector are in any place. And if we can get social value into how they are procuring their buildings and their development, then we're really going to make a massive difference. And that, I think, is, for us, the challenge of these next 12 months.
Finally, Lucy.
Finally, I'd just like to talk a bit about beneficiary voice, which has not been discussed at all today, a bit skated over. It's so important. This is why what we're doing it all for is to help people. And we know that, in general, the people who receive services rate and rank the services they receive very differently to how the funders of those services perceive them. So it's not only important, it would affect your decisions if you knew it. So, and I think the exciting opportunity is the range of technological ideas, some kind of big data ideas, new technology, new ways of communicating with people that mean we can bring beneficiary voice into the conversation in a lower cost way. It's often ignored because it's hard and expensive, but I think we're just on the cusp of finding approaches that are much cheaper and much more effective.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask everyone to thank our three panellists, Mark, Guy and Lucy.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Very well managed.
Yes.